Oh, hey. Hey, I'll be with you guys in a bit. I'm watching Jimmy's new You Laugh, You Lose. Be with you in a second. How's it going, Tube Tech students? It's your boy Diddles, and I would like to welcome you back to another episode of Dramatic Diddles. Now, we're delving into a fandom that is near and dear to my heart. Undertale. There's not much else to say. This game helped me through my depression, and now I'm going to be reading porn of it.
My how the mighty have fallen.
Now today we have a story by the name of Unexpected Confessions by TheLadyRedHeart. I glanced through it a little bit and it seems like this is going to be the easiest one to read out of most of the ones that we've read so far. It actually has decent punctuation and grammar. So I'm excited. What do you say we go ahead and jump right in? Oh, almost forgot. Cue the music. Now we can go. Unexpected Confessions. I think that was my favorite one so far, Frisk said as the credits rolled on the latest episode of an anime she and Sans had been watching. I kind of have to agree with you on that one, Sans replied. He wasn't the biggest fan of anime, but when Frisk had asked him if he would watch a DVD Alphys had compiled of some assorted anime, he just couldn't find the heart to say no to her puppy dog eyes. Oh, I see Frisk is a female in this fanfiction. I normally go with boy, but to each their own. Though he had to admit, he'd enjoyed them so far, and like she said, the latest one wasn't bad. So, can we start the next one? She asked eagerly. I don't know, kid. It's starting to get late, Sans said. Toriel might get a little upset. Please, just one more, Frisk asked, once again giving him those puppy dog eyes he just couldn't say no to. He sighed. One more, he said, and grabbed the remote, hitting play on the next one. This one he definitely didn't recognize, but then again, he hadn't recognized half of these. It started, and the first thing Sans noticed was the weird art style. It almost seemed retro. These gnats are gonna get enough of being in my room. It seemed almost retro, but yet not. It seemed more raw. Something made with a smaller budget than other anime. It seemed familiar. It seemed to proceed as a typical romance anime. Boy falling for the student council president but unable to approach her because of her status. Yet, the longer it went on, the more Sans felt uneasy. Then it finally hit him, and he recognized the style of anime this was. Without explaining, he immediately grabbed the remote and hit the home button, sending them back to the main select screen. How had Alphys let that slip in? Sans? Frisk asked, but Sans just laughed nervously. I changed my mind. I really don't want to get chewed out by Toriel, so you should head to bed, Sans said. But no buts, except yours in bed. Go. Sans said, trying to make his voice sound stern. Frisk opened her mouth to object, but quickly closed it again. After a few moments, she stood up and started walking towards the stairs. As she took a step up, she glanced back at the screen for a few seconds, before finally heading upstairs. Sans breathed a sigh of relief. He was happy he caught it before something really bad showed up, though he was a little uneasy again. He tried not to worry about it though, and he turned off the TV before heading upstairs himself. He felt exhausted, but wasn't sure why. Everybody else was already asleep, so Sans simply leapt into his own bed and pulled the sheets over himself. Usually he didn't sleep in his clothes, but he didn't feel like taking them off. He simply laid down and began to drift away.
It's so weird reading a fan fiction that is coherent. It's so weird.
A few hours later, Frisk's door slowly opened with a slight creak that made her cringe. She waited a few moments, but when she didn't hear anybody respond to the noise, she slipped through the crack in the door she'd made and gently closed it behind her. Clad in her comfortable pajamas, she crept down the hallway, taking extra care to be quiet while passing Sans' room. Once she was past, she carefully made her way downstairs. She could tell when Sans was hiding things from her, so she just needed to know what was on the DVD. She turned the TV on and made sure to mute it before she forgot. The anime had subtitles anyway, so she'd be fine. She grabbed the remote and selected the anime they'd started, but hadn't finished. Thankfully, it started right back up where they'd left off. She got onto the couch, still making sure not to make too much noise. The anime proceeded, and Frisk admired the strange retro style. It made her wonder how old this one was. A few minutes passed without anything spectacular happening, and Frisk started to think that maybe Sans hadn't actually been hiding anything for once. But then it happened. The guy was hanging out with the girl alone in the room when he suddenly tripped and crashed into the girl. During his fall, Somehow, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. This is nothing. It has nothing to do with the fan fiction. Just know there's a gnat in here. And for some reason, my ADHD brain was like, what if it landed on one of the keys? You slap the keys, whole computer shuts off, everything's gone. I don't know why. I thought of that. The guy was hanging out with the girl alone. The guy was hanging out with the girl alone in the room when he suddenly tripped and crashed into the girl. During his fall, he somehow managed to grab onto her uniform. It was a stereotypical anime cliche. But then something unusual happened. The guy managed to pull down her shirt and even her bra, causing her breasts to flop out of her shirt as they tumbled to the floor. Again, this wouldn't be anything crazy on its own, but the thing was, it wasn't censored. Frisk was staring at the girl's nipples. As the guy laid on top of the girl, his face buried in her chest, she examined them. They were nice and big, no surprise for anime, but the nipples were small and perky as they rested atop the pale mounds of flesh. Almost immediately, the sight of them made something stir within Frisk, and her hand twitched. Now she was invested. The girl's face went red, but she surprisingly didn't make an effort to cover up her chest. Instead, she simply helped the boy to his feet, and she looked away from him as he oogled her chest. He immediately began to apologize, but she quickly cut him off. She then admitted that she'd noticed him staring at her from afar, and was actually turned on by it. Frisk wanted to snort at the massive amount of cliches, but she was too invested staring at the girl's bare chest. The guy became flustered, unsure what to do. But then, the girl suddenly grabbed by his hand and placed it on her chest. His hand sunk into the soft flesh in a way that made Frisk's legs twitch. She felt an odd heat down below, something that she hadn't felt in a while. The guy tentatively squeezed her chest, even running his thumb over her nipple, which caused the girl to moan, though Frisk couldn't hear it. Frisk's hand began to twitch again, and almost like it had a mind of its own, it started to move towards her waist. As the guy marveled at the softness of the girl's large chest, Frisk's hand slipped underneath her pants and panties, where it soon met her pussy, which was slightly damp. The girl admitted that she wanted him to touch her more, and so she stepped back and fully removed her shirt, leaving her topless. She then undid her skirt, allowing it to fall to the floor, leaving her in just her panties. The girl told him that she wanted him to take the last piece off. The guy gulped and knelt down, bringing his hands up to her panties. He gently slipped his fingers under the waistband on either side and pulled them down. Frisk gasped as she saw the pussy was also uncensored. She was able to see every detail of it as the guy pulled the panties all the way down to her feet before the girl stepped out of them, leaving her now completely nude before the guy and Frisk. By this point, Frisk had her hand against her pussy and was gently rubbing her lower lips, which were soaking wet, and coating her fingers in juices.
I'm sorry, I just thought about the papyrus fight and felt a wave of guilt go down my spine.
The guy took a moment to examine her body with awe, an obvious bulge in his pants that made the girl giggle as her face was red. She gently grasped her chest, lifting up her breasts before allowing them to fall back down, giving them a nice bounce. Frisk felt her other hand move up under her shirt, where it found her own chest. Frisk's chest was small, but she could feel small mounds where her breasts were starting to grow in.
Wait a minute!
She gently grasped her breast and squeezed it as best she could, making her moan. The guy stepped forward and embraced the girl in a deep, passionate kiss, but at the same time, he also moved his hand down to her pussy and started to stroke it, just as Frisk was doing with her own pussy. Speaking of, Frisk was getting irritated by the feeling of her clothes against her warm body, so she removed her hands from her pussy and proceeded to strip down, despite the obvious danger of getting caught. It only took a few moments for her shirt, pants, and panties to sit in a pile next to her, leaving her sitting nude on the couch as she resumed touching herself.
For my sanity, I am going to be imagining this as an aged up, clearly 21-year-old Frisk.
You know what? I'm adding that sentence into the story. This is the first time Frisk has done this in 21 years. The first time she's ever done it in 21 years of her life. I'm adding that to this story. There you go. Now, none of you will go to jail. Well, maybe you, Tom. Maybe you. Maybe, but that depends on what you say in court. As she watched the guy finger the girl while kissing her and even reaching behind her to squeeze her nice firm ass, she pinched her nipple, making her moan again, louder this time, as she started to care less and less about being caught. At the same time, she started to wiggle a finger inside herself just as the guy was doing. Suddenly, the girl grabbed the guy and pulled him into an adjacent room, where a convenient mattress and chair was located. The girl sort of shoved the guy into the chair, and before he could protest, she unzipped his pants, reached inside, and pulled out his fully erect dick, also unsurprisingly uncensored. Frisk felt a strange mixture of unease and arousal as she shoved her finger completely inside her, making her gasp. The girl gently grabbed the guy's dick and started stroking it. Frisk's moans started to pick up in volume as the girl now placed her lips against the head of the guy's dick. Frisk's mind swarmed as she could only think of making herself feel good. What the hell?
Same, Sans.
A voice made Frisk jump as she nearly fell off the couch. She whipped her head toward the source of the voice and found Sans standing next to the couch, staring at her. She felt her face burn as she curled up, bringing her knees to her chest, putting a hand between her legs to try to cover herself up as much as she could. Sans? What are you doing? He asked, and looked away, his own cheeks somehow red. Somehow's correct. He is a skeleton. She didn't really have the ability to question it as she was enveloped by embarrassment. I can explain, she started. Why are you... How do you even know how to... Well, she's 21, Sans. She's obviously been through sex ed, so she knows how to do it. She's just never done it because she's never had a reason to, obviously. Sans was struggling to make a single full sentence. I'm sorry, Sans. I needed it, Frisk said, and Sans suddenly looked confused. Needed it? Sans asked. Frisk went silent, debating whether or not she should tell him. She looked up at his face and instantly knew she could trust him. I'm a virgin, Frisk said hesitantly. I haven't needed to do it since I fell into the underground. Why would that come into my mind of all things immediately?
Welcome to the underground. Over your balls. If you wanna fuck around, give us your balls.
I haven't needed to do it since I fell into the underground, and not since we made it back to the surface, so I was kind of missing it, Frisk said. Well, I mean, it's been years since it happened. You're 21 years old now, obviously. The two of them became silent for a while before Sans suddenly came over and embraced her in a hug. She felt a twinge of embarrassment at first, due to her naked state, but after a moment, Frisk uncovered herself and hugged him back. She held him tightly against her, surprised by how warm he felt, though that was probably just his jacket. Eventually, they pulled away from each other and Sans quickly looked away, as Frisk was no longer covering herself, leaving her chest in full view from how she was sitting. I can go back upstairs and let you finish, if you want, Sans said as he got ready to stand up, but Frisk reached up and grabbed his sleeve. You can stay. You can watch me, if you want, she said, and Sans went wide-eyed. What? You can stay. You can watch me, if you want, she said, and Sans went wide-eyed. What? He exclaimed. I trust you. I don't care how much I trust you as a person. You do not get to watch me jerk off. Do you understand me?
Oh
I trust you, she said, and Sans went silent, simply blinking as he stared at her in surprise. I would like to have you here, next to me. Sans seemed unsure what to say, but eventually he nodded and sat back down. Frisk gave him a small smile, and he nodded again. Frisk turned her attention back to the anime, or whatever this was, on the screen, where the girl was giving the guy a full blowjob at this point. Frisk brought one hand back up to her chest as the other went down to her pussy. She didn't take long to move a finger back inside herself, making her moan once again. She could see Sans out the corner of her eye, and saw that he was glancing back and forth between the floor, her, and the anime on screen. She couldn't help but giggle. For some reason, the idea of him watching her only helped to turn her on more. She actually shifted herself so she was more facing him, allowing him to actually see her pussy as she fingered herself. She thrusted her finger in and out of herself, moaning all the while. Meanwhile, Sans simply was left unsure what to look at. I heard people coming in the door.
Oh no!
She actually shifted herself so she was more facing him, allowing him to actually see her pussy as she fingered herself. She thrusted her finger in and out of herself, moaning all the while. Meanwhile, Sans simply left unsure what to look at. He tried to focus on the hentai, but after Frisk turned towards him, he couldn't help but stare at her body. Frisk had no hair down below. Stop making this harder on me!
Oh no!
Frisk had no hair down below because she shaved, and her breasts were very small, nearly non-existent. Strange for her age. Yet somehow, he felt something stirring inside him as he stared at her chest, especially as he pinched and pulled at her nipples. He felt a strain in his pants as his eyes flicked back and forth between her chest and her pussy as he watched her finger herself. Her moans also seemed to burrow deep inside his head and were driving him crazy. "Can I do it too?" he asked before he could stop himself. Frisk looked at him and smiled, nodding. Sans isn't he's a skeleton. Sans didn't hesitate for another moment before he stood up, grabbed his pants, and pulled them down to the floor before sitting back down. Frisk went wide-eyed as she was met with the sight of Sans' magical dick, made of pure magic, bright and blue. That's one of my favorite interpretations from the fandom, his magic penis. It was erect and throbbing intensely, and as soon as Sans touched it with his fingers, he moaned as well, making Frisk pause for a second, her face turning even darker shade of red. "Sorry," he said, feeling embarrassment unlike anything he'd felt before, but Frisk shook her head. "Please, do it more," she pleaded, and he nodded. Sans gently began to stroke himself, his dick feeling even more sensitive than usual, and he could feel it twitching and throbbing underneath his fingers. He could also feel Frisk's eyes on him as she continued to finger herself as well. Soon enough, neither of them were even paying attention to the hentai anymore. They were both just watching each other as they masturbated. In fact, the credits were already rolling and neither of them had finished yet. Sans wasn't sure if she was edging herself or she just hadn't come yet. Then she suddenly spoke. "Sans! Oh no! Stop. You're ruining these people's mood. They're trying to jerk off, Brandon. Why would you do that?" "Sans?" she asked, her voice shaky. Sans nodded, unsure if he could speak as he kept stroking his dick. I don't know if..." Frisk paused, seemingly struggling with her words herself. "Can we, do you want to do it with me?" Sans stopped. Had she? You don't mean..." Sans asked, not fully sure if he was able to believe what she was saying. But she nodded. "But are you sure you want to?" "Yes," she said. I like you. A lot," she said, her cheeks a deep red. "I care about you a lot, and there's no one else I'd rather do it with." "But I wouldn't think you'd want to after..." But she shook her head. "That's true, but I want to do it with someone I care about. Someone I actually want to do it with. Someone like you," she said, and smiled wide for him. If he had a heart, well, I mean, he has a penis, so he obviously has a heart. How does that correlate? If he had a heart, he knew it would be racing at this point. He was hesitant, but the look in her eyes was telling him that she wanted this. She wanted it so badly. "Okay," he eventually said. Frisk smiled even wider as she removed her finger from her pussy with a squelching noise. Ugh. Sorry, the gay came out, I'm sorry. Frisk smiled even wider. She removed her finger from her pussy with a squelching noise, allowing him to see just how wet she really was. "If that's what you want, then I'd be happy to," he said, smiling back at her. "Last chance. Are you really sure? You're about to have a bad time. Last chance. Are you really sure?" Sans asked. He was staring down at Frisk as she lay naked on the bed before him. He was able to see every inch of her body, and the more he stared at her, the more he wanted to touch her, kiss her, be inside her. But he wanted to make sure she wanted it too. "I told you, yes. I want nothing more than to do this with you, especially since we're both legal consenting adults," she said. It was weird for her to mention that, but Sans gulped and nodded. He looked down to where the head of his dick was pressed up against her pussy, ready to go inside. His dick was still throbbing, as if it knew what was about to happen. Sans took a deep breath and moved his hips forward, pushing his dick inside her. "Ugh," she cried out, but quickly tried to cover her mouth. They still had to be quiet, so they wouldn't wake anyone up. Sorry, she said as she removed her hands from her mouth. "I forgot how it feels when it first goes in." Sans brought a hand up to her cheek and caressed it, and she closed her eyes and leaned her head against his hand. "Are you ready?" he asked, and she nodded. With another deep breath, Sans pushed in deeper, and Frisk bit her lip to keep from making noise, tears building in her eyes. "Hey, We're almost there, Sans said, trying to comfort her. With one last thrust, he was fully inside her, and the two of them stayed there like that for a while, both of them already panting slightly. Then, Sans pulled away before moving back in, thrusting into her and causing her body to shake. Frisk whimpered, and the noise was almost enough to make Sans want to stop, but he knew that if they got past this part, it would start feeling really good. They just needed to get there. So he did it again, pulling away before thrusting back inside. This time, instead of a whimper, a moan escaped Frisk's lips. Hopefully the pressure was beginning to override the pain. Either way, Sans kept going, and began to thrust more and more, each time enjoying the feeling of his hips crashing against hers. The pain on Frisk's face quickly melted away as it was replaced by pure pleasure. Her moans started to become more frequent as Sans started to speed up his thrust. Suddenly, Frisk reached up and wrapped her hands around the back of Sans' neck and pulled him down, embracing him in a kiss. He hoped she wouldn't be disappointed by his lack of lips, but he couldn't help but get lost in the feeling of her warm, soft lips, and when she didn't pull away, he assumed she didn't care about his lack of them. Sans forgot what was going on and during the kiss and stopped thrusting, but then Frisk shook her hips a bit, reminding him. So, while he continued to kiss her, Sans resumed his thrust. Frisk moaned against his face, vibrating his skull in a way that made him shiver. Sorry, I got a bit weak in the knees there, imagining Sans having sex with this 21-year-old woman. Sans continued to go faster and faster, relishing in the feeling of his dick sliding in and out of her tight pussy. Some part of him knew he probably shouldn't be doing this.
Stop! I have to edit so much! Why would you openly admit that?
Some part of him knew he probably shouldn't be doing this, considering everyone else in the house was asleep, but he didn't care.
I'm just not reading that next line, thank you very much.
Plus, he couldn't seem to resist her want for him to be inside her. So he pushed those doubts away and kept going. Yes. Fuck yes, Frisk said as she finally broke the kiss. Sans almost laughed at hearing her speak profanity, but it was offset by just how hot those moans were. Yes. More. Yeah, I have to edit this one. I'm not letting Waterwitch edit this one. This one is bad. Sans was now plowing into her with all of his might, shoving his body hard against her with every thrust. Her moans continued to escalate, but somehow she managed to keep it under control enough to keep them somewhat quiet. Sans didn't know how he'd be able to explain this if they were caught. Instead, he decided not to think about it, which was easy considering the situation.
Sans!
Sans! Frisk cried out his name, as he could feel something building up inside him. Sans, I'm gonna... Frisk groaned, and her entire body shook as she came. Her cum sprayed all out from the sides onto the bed, staining them. Sans felt his head swimming as he felt her cum wash over his dick, but he didn't stop. He kept going, thrusting over and over, even as she settled down from her own climax, until he eventually felt his own approaching. They'd already discussed it beforehand that he wouldn't be able to get her pregnant, due to several reasons, so that's why when the time came, he shoved himself fully inside her. His body shook as he finally erupted, spraying not cum, but pure magic into her pussy. Okay, I know we've been through a lot with this story, but if Sans is gonna pour pure magic into my asshole, yo, I think I'm ready for this one night stand. Let's go, baby. The magic was a light blue, and it spilled out of her pussy onto the bed, mixing with her own cum. He kept pulling... I'm sorry, it's Sans from Undertale. I'm sorry. He kept himself inside of her until every lost drop had been emptied from his dick. When it was finally over, he pulled out, dripping some more onto the bed as he collapsed down next to her. The two of them laid there in the bed, panting and struggling to catch their breath. The two of them looked over at each other and smiled. I love you, Sans Undertale, Frisk said. I love you too, Frisk. 21-year-old I just had sex with, Sans said as he reached over and pulled her into a hug. Fuck it. If someone finds them in the morning, at the moment, he didn't care. He just wanted to stay with her, snuggled up like this, feeling her warm body against his. Eventually, he could tell by her breathing that she had fallen asleep. He smiled and gently stroked her hair as he snuggled up against her as much as he could. He closed his eyes, and he soon also fell asleep, descending into sweet dreams of the two of them together. Just like this. I want you all to be aware of how much I had to edit out of this story because I'm a changed man. Even I have things I will not put out on this channel. Do you understand me? Now, if it's already up, I'm going to leave it up there so future crowds can cancel me at some point. But any new stuff? Nah. I refuse. Absolutely refuse. But I still have to grade it. Punctuation and grammaration, punctuation and grammar. It was good. Really good sentence structure. 9 out of 10. Story, except for the parts I had to take out, it was a very nice one-shot story. I can see someone ignoring my reading of it and just rubbing their old dick to this story. I don't know why they would, but someone just getting it off one night, just making it really simple, really easy. I guess I can give this story a 8 out of 10. Minus 2 points for reasons. Thank you, Mac. You've really showed my point. 8 out of 10. Minus 2 points for obvious reasons that if you ever decide to read this, you will know why. 7 out of 10. Minus 3 points for if you read this on your own, you'll know why. And yeah, with that being said, class is dismissed. Don't forget to check out the Patreon and leave a like on the way out. With that being said, until next time, diddle out. This is one hell of a way to celebrate Christmas. Jesus Christ.
Che